Good afternoon and welcome to the British Society for Haematology Workforce Roundtable. My name is Ron Finlay and I'm not a haematologist, but I am working with the BSH on workforce and public affairs issues. But with me are some experts who are haematologists, and I'd now like to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with, on my left, Fiona.
Thank you. I'm Fiona Mile. I'm a recently appointed BSH trustee. I'm a consultant haematologist, been so since for the last 15 years, and I'm also very involved in medical education. So I run the clinical course at Leicester Medical School, and I'm deputy head of school there.
Mark.
Hi, my name's Mark Ethel. I'm a consultant haematologist in London, also recently appointed as a trustee at BSH. I was a training programme director in London for many years, the STC chair, and more recently have been the chair for the Specialty Advisory Committee for the UK in haematology. I hope to really look at the angle on workforce planning at the kind of training level, SPR level and above. Thanks.
Sir Jan.
Hello, I'm Sir Jan Rogosic. I'm one of the haematology registrars in London, but I also serve as a trainee representative at the Haematology Specialty Advisory Committee, and I'm also chairing Paediatric Haematology Training Network, so I'll be speaking both on behalf of all haematology trainees and paediatric haematology trainees.
And I'm Josh Wright. I'm a consultant haematologist of many years standing in Sheffield, and I'm the incoming BSH president as of tomorrow afternoon. And I'm here because this is clearly a key topic for BSH. We're very much aware of the workforce pressures that everybody's under, and feel there is something that we can offer and we can do about this. And I will be talking a little bit more about perhaps alternative models of service delivery as part of this roundtable. Thank you.
So what we'd like to do today is to explore what the issues are, and also I've particularly asked our guests to try to focus on what solutions they think we can put in place, which we will indeed want to help with to try to ease these workforce pressures. Obviously that's not going to happen overnight, but over a period of time I hope that we can make some good progress. So perhaps I can start with you, Fiona, and you can just tell us a little bit about the issues from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a sort of general background to where we are with undergraduate and perhaps foundation training a little bit, and what the problems are across all of UK undergraduate and early postgraduate training. There's a huge sort of loss of trainees once they graduate from medical school, and at the moment there's a huge drive to get more medical students into training. So currently, every year we take in 9,500 people into medical schools around the country. There have been 13 new medical schools in England alone in the last 20 years to try and increase the numbers. So there's twice as many going to medical school at the time that three of us on the panel went to medical school. Yet despite that, and all of the international graduates and the European graduates, so 16,500 people register every year with the GMC, and only 3,000 people formally fall off at the end. Despite that, it feels as if our workforce is shrinking across all of the specialties. So I guess later on in the roundtable, I might talk about some ideas I might have to try and think about what BSH can do to sort of help those graduates coming through into haematology. But certainly one of the things I worry about right now is how happy and content and welcomed medical students are in the training setting, so on placement. We're about to do our education session in an hour, and one of the things we're going to touch on is how it was medical students who were sent away immediately as soon as the pandemic hit, and their training stopped for a while. So we need to look after our colleagues of the future, but also foundation training. So there's 800 graduates at the moment who weren't given a foundation training place, despite the fact we're so short of foundation doctors. They are all now being guaranteed a place and going to be told where they're going to train in a few years' time. But there's lots and lots of work looking at our current medical students, how well they're doing, but also how dissatisfied they are, because You know, we've got an allocation process that for their first 2 years of work, which is probably completely unfit for purpose. And certainly Amir Sam from Imperial's recently presented some good, really interesting data to the Medical Schools Council suggesting that the current SJT and foundation allocation process should change. So I think that's sort of a summary of where we are with numbers. So we've got lots of people going in. The Medical Schools Council has recommended to the government that 5,000 more medical student places are made in the next few years. So going up from 9,500 to 14,500 to try and balance up those, i.e. to train more of our own so that we're not sapping from low-income countries where there's a real need to have their own workforce. There's an increasing diversity of our medical students, so we've got an increasing number of students at most of the new medical schools from widening participation backgrounds. But once we get those students in, we've got to have the good clinical placements to be able to train them well. And there's only so much you can do with online delivery of training. What you really need to see is lots of patients and be looked after very well on placement.
Sure. So, well, look, thank you very much for that introduction. Before we go further, though, perhaps I can just ask our final guest to introduce himself, who was unavoidably detained before. But John, would you like to just say a little bit about who you are and your introduction?
My name is John Ashcroft. I'm a consultant haematologist. I work in Leeds and Wakefield. I'm the chair of the Intercollegiate Haematology Committee, which is the committee between the RC PATH and the RCP, and I'm treasurer of the BSH.
Thanks very much indeed. So, Mark, would you like to sort of add a little bit more to the picture that Fiona started painting?
Yes, certainly. So I just wanted to identify a few things that have changed in haematology training recently, identify where I think the challenges are, and again, perhaps suggest one or two things that we could look at going forward. So a few things, very sort of recent changes in haematology. Obviously, we've had the new curriculum came on board last year. Haematology seems to be in the vanguard of many changes, which is probably a good thing, but I say new curriculum is up and running. The trainees who started last year are already using that curriculum, and the expectation is the more senior trainees will be changing over to that certainly by this time next year. I think the content of the curriculum hasn't changed enormously. It's a question of how the assessments are done and this spiral learning and so on. But I think it's gone relatively smoothly, and a huge amount of work done by some of my colleagues to get that to happen. I think leading on from that, again, this is not new, unexpected. There are expected to be changes in the FRC PATH exam related to the new curriculum, and again, and that will have some impact. But all these things have to go through GMC, so they take time, like all the other things we talked about. But again, changes coming forward. I think the other thing, I'm not saying it's unique to haematology, but we have to recognise and think about is that we have a significant proportion of our workforce, both at training and at consultant level, who work less than full time. And that again has a significant impact on how we plan for the future in our workforce. And obviously it's something that we're looking at, but I think we need to look at that more carefully, and I think that has a significant impact on things going forward as well. Also in haematology, traditionally, many of our trainees have gone out of programme experience, both research and other opportunities. And again, it's great, and that's something we want to support and to go forward with. But again, it just adds the complexities of how we factor into our rotations and get everything right. And again, just to touch briefly upon paediatric haematology, although I'm sure Sir Dan will talk more about that. Again, in haematology, it's unusual that we come out with a CCT and you can, at the end of the day, be an adult or predominantly a paediatric haematology. It's great that offers flexibility. It's something we want to support and have supported with the new curriculum. But again, we're very much aware that there are gaps in, certainly at consultant level, at paediatric haematology. Great that there are lots of trainees that want to train in it, but again, we don't really, at the present time, have the best facilities to do that, and it's something certainly we're looking at going forward. Just to say a little bit to put numbers in context, and these are very recent numbers. In total, in the UK at the moment, we have 499 haematology trainees. I don't think it probably feels like that to any of us in our original initial rotations, but again, that reflects both trainees in their ST3 to 7 programme, but also those that are out on various OOP experiences as well. So it is quite a large workforce. The other thing I think is very important to mention at this point, which is again is very topical right now, is the redistribution of haematology numbers in England. Again, just rather like the curriculum, the new curriculum, haematology was chosen to be in the vanguard of this, and one of 3 specialties where this is going to start I understand, going live later this year. And again, just to summarise, many people in the audience will be aware of this already, but it is likely, having had a huge preponderance of training numbers in London, where I work and have a passion for, that will change. The current estimations are that 41 out of the 81 HEE funded posts in London will move out of London over the next 5 to 7 years. Clearly, that's going to have a huge impact on training. My vision would be more that we should have an expansion of numbers rather than a redistribution. And I think, we have to manage this very carefully. And interestingly, with this redistribution of numbers out of London, if it goes forward in the current plan, certainly a large percentage, more than 25% of those numbers will still be set in South East England, in Kent, Surrey and Sussex, rather than around the rest of England. So again, I think it's something we need to focus on.
Mark, can I just ask you, I mean, the redistribution,
yes.
I accept that it would be good to have more places on top of that, but isn't the redistribution a good thing so that there is adequate supply of haematology trainees around the whole country rather than concentrated just in the capital?
No, absolutely. No, I do think we need to focus and have more trainees outside London, but I would be an advocate, I don't know what my colleagues around the table think, of actually having an expansion of numbers rather than just a redistribution. But you're quite absolutely right. We definitely need more training numbers outside London, and I think outside just London and the South East as well, which is where a significant proportion of this is going to be.
Right.
Yeah. One other point I wanted to make was in terms of recruitment to haematology at SPR level, our recruitment rates are good. Again, I've looked at these from the last few years. Generally in round one, we have close to 100% recruitment. We do fill all the posts. Again, my colleagues sitting beside me may not feel that's the case, but we do. We struggle more in round two. So I think there is an appetite and a lot of people that want to do haematology, which again is reassuring. But again, I don't think we need to think about that as well and make sure we're focusing on that as well going forward. And just a few points, because I know the others want to speak around the table in terms of where I think we are. I think we do need to look further at workforce planning. Obviously, this was looked at just before the pandemic arose, but we do need to, I think, look at this again and say, identifying some of the things I've mentioned, less than full-time trainee, those coming out of training are, as they get their CC2s, are they actually going into consultant posts? Are they doing something else first? Are they going into substantive posts immediately or going into locum posts? I think we need to look at that a little bit further. And again, just to flag up, I still think there's not a great understanding in other areas of the true full role of a haematologist. I say we do a lot of liaison haematology, which I think is really not recognised, and there's an app to look at that. And again, I'm sure Josh will probably mention that as well in his talk. And also that we do a lot of oncology. Again, to flag, there have been a significant expansion in medical oncology training numbers in the last couple of years, but not in haematology. And I say we do a substantial amount of oncology as well. And I say I think this is, looking forward to the workforce planning, there are lots of groups, and hence why we're all sitting around here, that are involved in this, including BSH, very importantly, but also the Royal Colleges, the ICH, which John will talk about. And I say, I think we need to look at this very carefully going forward. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mark. Surgeon, do you want to pick up?
Absolutely. I completely echo what Mark said. We do have sort of declining numbers. If we look at the workforce survey that RC Path has done in 2019, it had 288 consultants retire yearly, whereas we're only producing 234 trainees per year. So the haematology is a deficient specialty. Now, we have two main questions from trainee point of view: how are we going to gap, and who's going to cover these gaps in the workforce, and how is that going to affect the training? And I certainly know from my colleagues and peers in London, some of them are disheartened seeing that we'll be losing numbers. So our question is, why aren't we levelling up the whole country and increasing numbers rather than levelling down in London and improving? Nobody questions that we need more people on the shop floor, but training will be affected. I personally know that my daily work will be affected if I have 2 colleagues less. So we need to look at that. If we can't improve training numbers, then we need to find alternative solutions. At that point, we also need to look at generational characteristics, which we often don't talk about. Each of these numbers are people, and I'm coming to my senior registrar levels, and I often get myself saying, oh, when I was a junior, I wasn't like that. Then I bite my tongue and I say, actually, this is the workforce that we have. So how can we use the workforce that we have to the best extent. So these are some of the discussion points that we all need to have when we engage with trainees and future consultants.
And would you say also that the retirement of senior consultants is also reducing the number of trainers available?
Absolutely.
And putting a lot of pressure on their time?
No, absolutely, and this is why we all need to be aware of differences and again, generational characteristics, that we need to train each other and train junior staff to train more junior staff. And in terms of pediatric hematology, which I'm also here to talk a little bit more about, pediatric hematology always had sort of a special role within hematology, because we do have different subspecialties. After we complete our training, we still are consultants hematologists, but we don't, or majority of us do not work with adults, and these are the specificities that we need to recognize. How are we going to do that? John Granger, who is the chair of Pediatric SIG, has done amazing work along with Becky James from Leeds, and there is a working group looking at, with the HEE, how we can redesign pediatric hematology training. I'm hoping that we'll have some other discussion points during this.
Well, I'm right in thinking that you have to qualify as an adult hematologist before you can then move into pediatrics. Is that right or not?
Well, we would argue that we shouldn't be qualifying for an adult. We should. The training is 5-year training program. Currently, most of trainees who want to do pediatric hematology do around 2 years of pediatric hematology and 3 years of adult. We've done the recent survey among pediatric hematology trainees, and 71% feel that that's too long time to do in adult hematology. Not that we don't think that we need to do it, because some things, and we'll touch on this as laboratory service, morphology is far richer when you look at adult marrows, when you look at adult blood films. It trained me as a better morphologist. I would not change my time in adult hematology, but could I use more pediatric hematology time, considering I'm going to be pediatric hematology consultant? Yes, I could.
Yes, thanks. Josh, what's your?
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing everybody's particular point of view on this, and you know, a lot of this is available through various workforce surveys and undergraduate surveys, but still striking to hear the figures. But actually, what does it feel like on the ground? I mean, you know, just in my own department, we're probably going to lose half of our senior consultant, associate, specialist workforce in the next 5 years to retirement. Even if we recruited every one of the trainees that we have in the region, and this is disregarding all the other hospitals around our region that might need trainees, we won't fill those gaps over the next few years. The change in demographic, well, not just the change in demographic, but male and female trainees wanting to be part-time now. Day to day, there is that constant fight of who's here, have we got things covered, who has to do what extra. So, you know, this is a painful process, and although we absolutely have to look at increasing numbers of trainees into haematology, that process is laborious and very slow. So there is an urgency and an immediacy for us to look at the way we deliver our services, to try and take pressure off, to preserve training, ensure we don't have burnt out doctors, celebrate and empower our advanced nurse practitioners, employ more physicians associates. I've just listened to a really good talk from a physician's associate in this meeting. I attended a talk by an advanced nurse practitioner yesterday. There's abstracts and posters on pharmacy and clinical science delivered services, and we really have to embrace those advanced clinical practitioner roles and bring them in to our departments with a degree of urgency. I think it's absolutely mad that the physicians associates, which we're now churning out of universities at several thousand a year, have not yet got the regulations through. And I don't really understand what the hurdles have been that have pushed that back and back and back. And it's now back to late 2023, I understand, before they will be able to prescribe and order ionising radiation. But these things are an additional obstacle for us. But I think there are the solutions there, both in the sort of medium and longer term. But we've just got to really embrace different modes of practice and different models of service delivery, I think, to allow this to happen.
Josh, what about another potential short-term fix being to try to recruit more doctors from overseas? How feasible is that?
Well, I mean, John might be able to tell us more about the RC path approaches to that. But I think the difficulty is this is a global workforce crisis for medicine and nursing, and you've got to be careful that you don't actually deplete country staff who have a greater need than we do. I think there are opportunities in terms of spells of training. But one of my colleagues from one of our district general hospitals was telling me this morning that they used to have a steady flow of trainees coming from Sri Lanka who would spend 18 months, but now the Sri Lankans wish these individuals to have transplant experience, and therefore that's dried up because they can't offer that there. So I think it's not an easy solution. There are ethical issues in abundance, and we have to be very careful we don't create problems by doing this, I think.
Right. Thank you. And John, tell us your perspective from working across with the RC Path and the Royal College of Physicians as well.
I think going fifth on the panel is sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. I think Josh asked me a question, he then answered it very, very eloquently himself.
Sorry.
But I think from the points that have been made so far, there's some very specific issues to do with the training numbers. Certainly the redistribution, the argument is that we should have more. And when we strip these out of London, Mark makes a very good point that London has got to supply its district general services for its population as well as its specialist services. And when we take those trainees out, how does that district general facility get provided? And so the RCP, with the RC Path and working with the BSH, is working very hard actually to put the arguments together towards Health Education England to try and justify why we should be getting increasing haematology trainee numbers. And I think the crux to that is the hidden work that haematologists do, the liaison, the lab work, all that interactions, because without haematology, there isn't a transfusion service in a hospital. Operations don't go ahead. So we are critical, we're mission critical to the NHS in England. And paediatrics as well, in particular, I think that's a very thorny issue in that we're one of the very few specialities where we're training paediatric doctors in an adult haematology setting and then expecting those doctors to go off and be paediatricians. And I think that all needs to be addressed over the coming years. And these are all things that are being worked on through the RC Path.
Yes, but if I could just play devil's advocate for a moment, I mean, haematology may be very pressed and, you know, as you say, with impending problems looking worse because of retirement and so on. But surely it's not the only specialty, and you know, throughout England, the whole country, especially post-pandemic, is suffering. There's a lot of pressure on NHS funding. So how do we make the case to AGE and others that haematology should be treated in a special way? Fiona.
There is some data. So if you look at the GMC surveys, which happen every year, of both trainees and trainers, if you look at the answers from haematology trainers, so that's us, the consultant staff, I think generally haematologists are seen as really good trainers. So overall satisfaction from trainees is high in most regions. But if you look at the last 3 years, actually it's the last 3 surveys over the last 4 years, because there wasn't one in the height of the pandemic, we are the 4th worst in terms of having time to train. So in terms of what we answer in our surveys, despite the fact we are generally seen as good educators and we like training people, we teach people in the lab and in the clinic and research, we are reporting compared to the other 60-something specialties in the country that it's only clinical oncology, medical oncology and one other that are worse than us in the 2021 survey. So it's the 3 cancer specialties, you know, no surprise. So I think there is data there that suggests that we need to have more people to train well.
Josh?
The point's been made, you're right, how do we how do we push ourselves to the front of the queue? There's no doubt about it, haematology is a large specialty, but if you compare it to some of the real precious specialties, general acute medicine, elderly care, those problems are far greater for HEE and the RCP to deal with. So we really have to argue our own case. And I think Mark is right. I think the question rears its head again about whether haematologists should be taking part in acute takes. And my own opinion is that would be an utter disaster for our profession and should be headed off at all costs. It was very ably sort of dealt with a few years ago. But I think, as John says, I think you can't run a hospital without haematologists. And actually, if you talk to our trainees about how much time they spend, and consultants and DGHs, about how much time they spend supporting primary care, supporting the actual functioning of an acute take, I would really strongly argue that we are already part of that process, and actually taking us out of those roles will actually make the take more dangerous, not safer. And so one of the things I think we've discussed amongst us is drawing together some of that information about time spent doing this work, which is uncounted and uncosted, would be a really good method of trying to push our cause. And so please do your liaison haematology quick questionnaire within the app before you leave the meeting or as soon as you can after. It only takes a couple of minutes and it might provide us with some very useful information.
John? Yeah.
Just one other point to the evidence that's available about us being probably one of the worst specialities from the point of view of losing consultants. There was the RCP survey that was done 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and that shows that over the general medical specialities, we're going to lose more consultants over the next 10 years than most others, because we're all quite old.
Right. Okay, just on another tack, though, it has been said to me that, as technology improves, so particularly in the lab, I guess, but perhaps throughout healthcare, the need for people is slightly diminished. I mean, is that a fair argument that some could make or not, do you think?
Go on.
I mean, we're all haematologists and we find haematology quite logical and straightforward, but no matter which country you're in, if you survey, undergraduates and sort of trainee doctors about the harder specialties, haematology and neurology always come in the top 3. It's seen as a really difficult specialty. So even with drugs that have been recently introduced not that recently now, but fairly recently introduced to replace warfarin, so anticoagulants, we're not the primary doctors using them. In fact, for a lot of reasons, we don't use as many as other specialists, yet our registrars sometimes take 20 to 30 calls a day for the management of these and similar drugs. So one of the things we've really got to do, and one of the things that's been squeezed out of lots of undergraduate curricula, is more practical haematology when people are training before, because it's actually the surgeons, the general practitioners, the anaesthetists who need to have good understanding. So lots of the education work that BSH does is great, but we probably need to be championing, and we have done some work championing haematology being retained in sort of a core curriculum for undergraduates in this country.
Thank you. Yes, and you make the point that there's this perception that haematology is a very difficult specialty. Is that fair, do you think? And if it isn't, what can be done to dispel it?
We're all really, really clever.
We have to maintain our air of mystique.
Yeah. I'm just going to take a step back. If you look at what comes through departments and the complaints that come through departments, because every department, however good you are, gets complaints, it's almost invariably communication. And if you pull a load of people out of a specialty like this, which demands communication with patients and their families in desperate situations, communication with a wide variety of other specialties across an organisation, medical specialties across an organisation. So in answer to your question, although there are some things that technology will improve, we are a long way off that bit yet. Yes. In terms of are we, I think every specialty has a mystique to it until you get into it, and perhaps the mystique of haematology comes back to what Fiona has just pointed out about this not being covered very well within early training. And if we are, but on the whole, I don't find that necessarily puts people off being interested in the subject. For many people, it's the combination of science, advanced medical technologies, and transplantations and cellular therapies that actually induce people to go into the specialty.
And I think it's encouraging, a lot less core medical training doctors now that will get any exposure to haematology. That's the way things have gone. But as you say, Josh, still lots of people want to do haematology. Our recruitment is very high, which I think, again, is very positive that the people are out there that want to do it, wherever they get their taste for it along the way, be it at undergraduate level or as an earlier doctor in training, the numbers still seem to be out there, and the recruitment is considerably better than it is for a number of hard-pressed specialties, as we mentioned before.
But are you saying, though, that despite the recruitment being good, nevertheless there's a drop-off along the way, or not really? Or is it just that there's not enough places in the first place?
I think our total numbers still are inadequate, number one. Yeah. Number two, as a number of people have said, that we have an ageing workforce with quite a number due to retire in the imminent future. So yeah, I think you say the people are out there. It's different to other specialties, sure.
And also more of our trainees are part-time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when other specialties are under pressure, and so there's more other specialties that are short-staffed, like Josh was describing, you come into work on a Monday trying to see if you've got enough people to staff the bone marrow list, the lab, etc. When other specialties are under pressure, they call more for advice. And we're not the only specialism that has a lot of liaison work, and everybody notices that when experienced people go, or when their rotas are tighter, there's more call a friend.
So in other words, you're sometimes being called up for your specialist knowledge, when in fact others more general consultants should be able to have that. Is that fair?
Sometimes,
to a degree, but I think the general trend is that we are all becoming more and more specialised. I had a horrible moment yesterday listening to an endocrinologist tell me how to manage steroid reduction, which is part of my bread and butter day to day, and I find out I do it really badly. And so the problem is I say that not to highlight my level of incompetence, but more to highlight that we have to recognise our specialty and the very highly technical nature of it. And I don't think we're going to ever see a drop in the number of calls, because specialties get further and further divided and complex.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. And as medicine becomes more complex, people do tend to work in bunkers. And if you don't understand something in your bunker, you immediately reach out to somebody else, and a lot of the time that can be the haematologist.
I would argue that's appeal for prospective trainees to come into haematology. We have so many things: laboratory, transfusion, transplant, non-malignant, malignant, and somebody who still loves such breadth will come into haematology. So I think that's the appeal, to bring more people in.
But Josh, then, if as you say, this specialisation is becoming more and more focused, is it the case, as you were saying, that you can possibly try to get physician associates and others to do some of the more general work? And is there a way that workforce can be reorganised so as to enable that?
Absolutely. It's enormously capable people, physicians associates, advanced nurse practitioners, highly trained pharmacists as well, moving into the ACP field. We've got one running a superb CML clinic. Very, very high levels of knowledge about the disease and the drugs involved. So we have to look at all these things. And so I suppose that brings us to some of the solutions for this, as I noticed the clock ticking down. And I suppose from BSH's point of view, we can push the agenda along with the SAC chairs, with HEE, with the ICH, RCP, and a few other acronyms to boot, and push the arguments for increased numbers of trainees. We can certainly assist in that, and we have a great membership who we can collect data from that would support those arguments. I think we can also support people coming into the specialty through the early career setups. I think mentorship programs. These are things that we haven't got at the moment that we're in the process of looking at. At the other end of the scale, we can actually look at those getting near to retirement. Can we encourage them and give them examples of being able to stay on in the specialty a bit longer and provide that huge experience that they have in a perhaps a slightly more part-time way and make those posts attractive? Can we draw in all these areas of good practice that I know already exist, but I don't know where? Can we pull these in and BSH provide a sort of central focus and forum for these examples and contact points for how you set up novel services, generic job descriptions for PAs, business cases for pharmacy-led support clinics, things like that. So I think BSH can do a lot to support the process, and so on the softer side as well as the more sort of business end of it, with your help, Ron, arguing the importance of haematology to general medicine and hospitals in general, and trying to get our messages heard at a higher level.
But you're also saying that there are sort of models of good practice around the country which may not be emulated elsewhere.
There clearly are, but it's patchy, and we all work in our own trusts, and people don't have lots of time to look up and sniff the breeze. And I think it should be possible for BSH to pull that stuff in.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've seen that in so many other parts of medicine that we've worked in as well. That there is that potential for many trusts to learn from others, but it's just a question of getting the communication right so that happens. And I think you're right, the BSH has an important part to play potentially in that. And what other solutions do other members of the team have in mind?
Well, I think the extended roles, the AMPs, the ACPs, the consultant pharmacists have all got an essential role to play. I think we always hark back to, though, those are going to help during the day. They can't do the medical on-call overnight. They can't give the specialist clotting advice. And so I think we've got to make sure that the hospitals are aware that although they are part of the solution, and the other part of the solution is maintaining the medical numbers and increasing the medical numbers. And I think some units don't always take that on board as much as maybe they should.
And Jan, in paediatrics, what are your thoughts there?
Well, paediatrics is hopefully going through a large change thanks to BSH Pediatric SIG that's taking the lead with HEE and DHC. So I think we all need to come around the same table and redesign how pediatric haematology works, and I'm really optimistic that might happen within the next few years, and that will resolve the issues about pediatric haematology staffing as well. Whether there are roles for other specialties and other professionals, of course, but when it comes to physicians associates, they normally don't go into pediatrics, and so I think we need to look at the whole picture, and Pediatric SIG is doing an excellent work with that.
Good, thank you.
I think you're just saying so. It's the ideal opportunity to be looking at that now, isn't it? With all these other things going on, with the redistribution of numbers and so on, to be focusing on paediatric haematology training as well.
Absolutely.
Right now.
Fiona?
Yeah, so I mean, HE is HE is going to become something else for a start, but HE has just changed its distribution of funding. So there's going to be a lower tariff for medical students and a higher tariff for other AHP trainees. So actually it's the time for our members to go looking for AHP students to attract them into haematology. So physicians associates, etc. But it does mean we really need to sort of look after our medical students as well. BSH Education Committee does a great job. So there's various initiatives. So all ST3s who are appointed are invited to a BSH sort of induction training day, which is really well received. There's careers leaflets from the BSH, and I think we need to sort of get champions around, in all sites, trying to encourage people into haematology. And the third thing I was going to mention was an initiative led by the BSH Education Committee and supported by Katie and others, which is people returning to the profession after a period off work. And again, I gather that's been evaluated really well. So people returning after maternity leave or other leave out in research and coming back and having an update. And that's, again, something we can do to try and retain people in the profession.
And we've been focusing on the clinical side of things, but what about on the lab scientists, haematology? Any thoughts on how we can improve supply there?
I think that's a very difficult question. It's not something that I've been intimately involved in, although the RC Path does have committees that are working specifically down that line. I'm afraid I don't have an answer to you for that one.
It's a bit like Josh said about providing models. We've got a consultant clinical scientist in Haematopath now, and she's fantastic, and she helps to train the registrars, and it's about working together. In fact, you know, she had her training alongside the registrars, and now she's training. So I think having little pockets of where that's worked well and sharing it is as Josh said, would be ideal.
Good. And so tell me, I mean, Josh, perhaps, I mean, you know, if you were trying to think about one or two key things that you would like to achieve over the next 2 or 3 years, what do you think they would be in respect to this workforce issue?
Well, I think the process of increasing training numbers is going to be a long one. Hopefully I'm wrong, but so I think we should address those arguments about liaison and workload and try and get reasonable propositions put together as quickly as we can. And I think perhaps the easy wins are to try and gather in those good evidence of good practice within BSH and keep this as a major topic for conversation. I don't think haematology is necessarily you know, it's not a shouty specialty. It doesn't sort of sing its own praises. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, but I think we probably need to kind of push haematology out there a bit more in the public eye as well.
Good, yes, thank you. Well, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, perhaps I can also ask the rest of the panels just to say their sort of one main change that they'd like to see happen over the next 2 or 3 years. So perhaps I can start with you, John, as well.
I'd like to see us get enough evidence together to actually put the proper arguments to HAE to make sure that we get increased training numbers. That's got to be the underlying priority for me.
Thank you. And so, John?
I would definitely echo what Josh and John said. We need to increase the numbers, and obviously while looking at those numbers, we need to look at the pediatric haematology numbers as well. Haematology is growing, and it's growing alongside other specialties that need our help. So that's the piece of work that we need to do and increase the numbers.
Okay, thank you. And Mark?
Yes, sounds like a bit of a stuck record, isn't it? I mean, that clearly is my priority as well. And I think, as we've talked about today, it's really having the data to support that and show and to get an increased understanding of what haematologists do and why we do need more trainees overall.
Fiona, have you got any other
well, I mean, just that we are going, you know, we do need to increase our numbers. There are going to be increased numbers coming out of medical school in the next few years. We've had 2 massive bulge years of intakes with the A-level solution provided by the government. And so there will be more medical students coming out, and we need to sort of inspire a lot of them to do haematology. So we need to sort of find out who at a local level is teaching them and inspiring them.
Thank you. So to try to sum up, I suppose what I'm hearing is that haematology is still perhaps not understood how important a role it plays right across the spectrum of all the services that are delivered. And as you've mentioned, many of you, the liaison haematology is a really important part of the work which is unnoticed because it's not properly recorded. So we really need much better data on that to demonstrate how much time is being devoted. Also that the trainers themselves are extremely pressed, and you know therefore the amount of time that there is for training is itself limited, and that although the redistribution of trainees around the country is happening, actually that's not a substitute for requiring more trainees overall. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got lots of people coming up for retirement in the next few years, but we can perhaps try to induce some of them to stay. We can also try to get some on maternity leave or others sort of to return to the field. And there are different ways of working where we can get other practices to sort of to fill in some of the gaps. So would that be a sort of reasonable description, do you think, summary of what we need to do?
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much then to all of our panelists. I hope that all of you today have learned something and enjoyed our session. I'm really grateful to all of you for participating. We really appreciate it. I think we're going to come back again and do this next year, and we hope we'll have a lot of good news, or at least progress to report on the steps that we're managing to achieve to get proper recognition throughout the health system of the really important part that haematologists play, and to encourage more trainees to join and to get the ultimate prize from the government, which is more funding for this specialty. So we'll see you then next year. Thank you very much indeed.